Yes.
So I really like where you're having difficulty is in the fuzzy lines between understanding the complexity of the tool and the complexity of somebody using that tool in the world. And I really like you starting with a simpler question, which is defining the complexity of the tool. It's sort of like in your prior work defining abstractness as opposed to salience, which is to say, how many sort of intellectual steps do you have to go through to get from one place to another just in sort of the raw, chunk size units that we're going to be arbitrary about. How many different controls are there, period? How many different readouts and all the rest? And that's not to say how many different things, and I think that's really important. So that's where you're sort of defining, and this is where you went. This is, what you talked about. I think that's really good. I think the other thing then you're going to have to think about when you start carving out other questions is some of these things you can separate apart. You might be able to say, the tool is separate, separatable in some sense to first order. I don't think you're going to be able to separate prior knowledge and situation that you're in. It is my suspicion, maybe along with task. And it might be that you have to blend these three and tackle all of those at once in order to say, okay, I'm going to look at a certain kind of use of this tool at a certain grade level where people come in with traditional forms of understanding about representations, about content, and all the rest of it, and therefore bound your work in particular ways. Then all of a sudden, by doing that, you're going to blend these three things into a chunk, and then you can start comparing that to these and talking about the relation between those.
Right. So, you're saying try to control for these three while varying this, for example.
Or the other way around, too. Yes.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah. But the question is, so you could ask the question, how do middle school students use and make this tool to make sense of chemistry? All right? I think that's sort of a reasonable question, because then what you're going to be talking about all of a sudden is you're talking about school, you're talking about middle school, age kids. You can start sort of bounding particular framing on that, and all of a sudden now you can start, and I think it's empirical, you start seeing how is it that people make sense of this particular tool. What is it that they're seeing in this tool? This is, this is actually going from that, again, in your former parlance, going from abstractness, this abstract nature of how many different steps, how complex is this tool, to what is it that people see in that tool when they're using it, what you previously called salience. And by contextualizing it in these particular ways, bounding it then, you can say, how is it that middle school students use this object, or college students? And I think I think it is going to be task specific. I think that's also one of the brilliant things about putting games into these, is it changes the task and what is it people think that they're supposed to be doing. Yeah. See ya.
Thanks, John. Yeah, another thing that I've thought about these is that there's no reason to think that these should all be equally weighted.
Nothing.
So you might be able to say, sure, the situation matters, but maybe it only matters a little. So we might be able to relatively weight these different factors, or as Noah said, if we just specify what these different things are, these are middle school students working on an acid base in this school district, and what they're supposed to be doing is learning to explore like a scientist. Then we can specify all these things and then work within that those boundaries. But part of the difficulty is figuring out what are the important factors that let us identify what the topic, prior knowledge, task, and situation actually are. And things like task can be subjective in that even in the same classroom with the same worksheets, different students might view what they're supposed to be doing differently. So it's a difficult problem. We're making headway. Okay, I think 6 minutes over. So thank you all very much for